It is my pleasure as a Spanish dietitian to co-chair this workshop. And sadly, Ingela Marklinder from Sweden couldn't make it because of familiar issues. And from here, I'd like to send her our best wishes. So this means we are going to have two talks, Amalia and Luzia. And because of this, we're going to have longer talks, but also we're going to have more time for discussion. So we'd like to encourage you to make this workshop very practical, and please feel free to ask and to interact with the speakers. The first speaker is Amalia Tsagari. She's a clinical dietitian working in a Greek public hospital. She is working on the area of musculoskeletal healthy and aging. And she also used to work for malnourished older adults. She's a member of the board of Hellenic Dietetic Association, but also to the EFAD, European Federation of Association of Dietetics. And her talk is about menu planning in long-stay residential care and its impact on gut microbiota. Amalia?
I assume that I can use these microphones. Hello to everyone. Hello to everyone. I just have to make a small correction. I'm a member of the expert group of IFAD's older adult expert group. And it's a great pleasure being here today with you. And it's also a challenge. When the organizers, the scientific committee, contacted IFAD and asked from the IFAD expert group of older adults to have interesting titles for a workshop. It was a challenge finding something that is very, very practical. What we decided is to focus in one patient group in this specific talk, and these are older adults, and specifically older adults living in long-stay residential care. We wanted it to be very, very practical, so it will be emphasized. The emphasis is on menu planning. These are the current recommendations as far as planning a menu for care homes. I'm sorry, I probably have to speak a bit more away from the microphone. These are the current guidelines as far as planning a menu for a care home are concerned. I decided there are no universal European guidelines. This is why I use the guidelines of the Food Standards Agency in the United Kingdom. What we know about the surveys in this population group, although it is a diverse group, we know that on average they consume the right amount of fat, but people in the highest quartile of fat intake, they consume something like 50% of their diets as fat. We also know that probably they consume a little bit too much saturated fat, too much non-milk extrinsic sugar, and too much salt. And on the contrary, there are some micronutrients and minerals, vitamins, where we know that a fragment of this population is actually consuming less than what it is supposed to consume. These are namely potassium, magnesium, riboflavin, zinc, iron, folate, and vitamin D. So what the guidelines, and these are the only guidelines for care homes, and this is a practical menu, tell us that in order for us to provide the proper food for people, older adults staying in long-stay residential care, we have to make this adaptation to their lifestyle. We have to pay attention to saturated fat, salt, and non-milk extrinsic sugar, and to the above-mentioned vitamins and microminerals. We set as target recommendations the average population recommendation, and we only address this for people 75 years or older. These are the recommendations that we will now introduce. And what we do is that we include less than 98% of this target recommendation in meals and snack for the nutrients, the micronutrients, and the micronutrient that we feel that they over-consume. That is saturated fat, total fat, salt, and non-milk extrinsic sugar. And in order to make sure that they do not consume in excess. And on the contrary, for the micronutrients that we know that they consume less than the target recommendation, we make certain that they consume something like 90 to 100% of dietary reference value only at meals and not at snacks. This is a very practical way of making certain that overall they eat what they're supposed to eat. But you haven't heard till now any use of the gut microbiota concept. And these dietary guidelines that till now exist do not include the innovative use of prebiotics and probiotics. I found very few. I didn't find proper recommendations, and there were no guidelines that are used for this population and for prebiotics and probiotics. This is very interesting because we already know that diet is a controllable factor, and we know that it has been shown that it influences microbiota composition in animal models, in small-scale human studies, and over the longer term. So why isn't it included? Although for older age adults we need to have some things in mind, and the difficulty of making specific recommendations. This is that we know that although there is a repetitively observed repetition in older age, there is a decrease of bifidobacteria and increase of enterobacteria. There is no typical and age-specific composition for the gut microbiota. And this has to do with increased inter-individual variability. So it's very difficult for us to have specific guidelines. Moreover, there is a clear impact of geography, of diet, of healthy and unhealthy aging, of frailty and disease. Consequently, we are talking about a very diverse population. This is why till now there are no specific guidelines that dietitians can actually use in their everyday practice. So, what we know from research, and this is a very interesting study that correlates gut microbiota with diet and health in the elderly. And the variable of where they live is incorporated in the analysis. Is that of it's Clayson, and it's a quite large study. It involves 178 subjects. About 1/3 of them are community dwelling older adults. 1/3 live in long-term residential care, and have a small fraction of them attending outpatient day hospitals and or are at short-term rehabilitation hospital care. What we know in this study is that there were differences on family level, microbiota assignments at genus level, and genera-associated. We have different composition of the gut microbiota according to where older adults stay. And how does diet influence this gut microbiota? If we separate the population of this study into 4 dietary groups. Dietary group 1, eating a diet low in fat and high fiber. Dietary group 2, eating a diet in moderate in fat and high fiber. Dietary group 3, moderate fat, moderate fiber. And dietary group 4, high fat, low fiber subjects. We see that the majority of community dwelling and day hospital care subjects actually followed the dietary pattern too. They ate moderate amounts of fat and their diet was high in fiber. But as far as long stay residential care older adults, we know that they ate too much fat and that their diets were low in fiber. What is very, very interesting, and the interesting question is whether there is the time sequence of change. Is diet proceeding or is it following entering residential care? So what was very, very interesting is that after an older adult actually enters residential care, his diet style changes after only 1 month. But it takes something like a year in order for his composition of gut microbiota to change. So we know that diet proceeds and then there is a difference in long stay in gut microbiota. So if we know that diet actually, and we have a lot of data saying that dietary patterns actually influences gut microbiota, the truth question is why we as dietitians have so many difficulties in implementing changes at food served at long stay residential care. We have to be able to deal with barriers in implementing change on diet served, on food served, and I found a very interesting study focusing on this specific issue. It's a process evaluation of 5 care homes in the northern part of England. It uses all 5 care homes actually were ranked as very good or excellent according to the standards of care that they offered to their older adults. And we know that this study tried to focus on observation and interviewing the staff that was working in these care homes, and they explored their views. They were staff manager staff, care staff, domestic staff, catering staff. What we know and what was very, very difficult is in order to make back and implement any form of dietary guidelines, the difficulty in this specific fragment of the population, it was very, very difficult for all people living, for people working in care homes to make any sense of nutrition guidelines. They actually thought that they were unnecessarily restrictive and irrelevant to older people. If the guidelines did not make sense, so they did not invest in the nutrition guidelines. And even when they were forced in a way to implement specific nutrition guidelines, they were lacking the knowledge to implement it, and they lacked what we call collective action. They were not helped by their institution to actually adhere to these guidelines. And last but not least, the lack of short-term benefits really was very, very negative, because since they did not see any short benefit, they did not wish to invest more in sustaining the differences and in sustaining the food provision according to the guidelines. These are very, very interesting because as dietitian we do not only say recommendations, but we have to make certain that they are actually implemented. So, the registered dietitian is the bridge that connects consumers to evidence-based research for improving health. So, in order to convince food caterers or long-stay residential care for older adults to plan their aim in order to improve their residents' gut microbiota, we have to be very, very knowledgeable about the guidelines, and we have to be very, very knowledgeable of the claims, functional claims that are related to prebiotics and probiotics. As I was looking at regulation, I realized that there is a vast difference in regulation all over Europe and in the United States. The regulatory notes are different, and as a result the dietetic practice points have to be different. So I took the paradigm, for example, in Canada, and we can discuss for probiotics and prebiotics and discuss them as a subset of function claims. There are two types of probiotic claims, the strain-specific and non-strain-specific claims. So what is very, very important is for the registered dietitian to be aware of regulation where he or she practices. As dietitian, we have to be very, very aware of subtle differences between health claims and nutrient function claims. We can provide consumers with health-related information that goes beyond nutrient content, but does not specifically mention disease. And the registered dietitian should help the consumer to make deductions regarding the relevance of the nutrient function claim to a particular area of health and disease. These are very thin lines, and it's probably very difficult to distinguish, but we have to know them if we're going to promote the diversity of gut microbiota, and if we would like to influence our clients, and especially older adults living in care homes in their use. So if we separate this is very practical, this is a practical workshop, nutritional intervention with prebiotics and probiotics. Do we need, and I don't know whether someone would like to answer this question, do we know the definite definition of prebiotics? I don't know. Oh, please.
It's a non-digestible oligosaccharide or saccharide that can be fermented in the colon and produces a short-chain fatty acids like acetaldehyde and propanol. And because of the linkages that has between the carbons, it doesn't have like the enzymatic usual specimen. But the difference between this and fiber is that this promotes the growing of the probiotics or the good bacteria.
Yeah. Yes, of course. I think you said all the points, the key points. We need something that is non-digestible. It doesn't have to be a carbohydrate, as in the prebiotic definition actually does not only include, it mainly includes carbohydrates, but there are other food constituents that do not belong to carbohydrates, but we feel that they have prebiotic use, and it has to have a benefit to the host, and it has to be so clearly that there is an increase or a change in the growth in the bacteria of the colon. So this is very, very practical. When we talk, we can use and emphasize three key points. Non-digestible, stimulate the growth or activity of bacteria, and confer benefits to the host. What are they? Where are they found? The majority of them are carbohydrates, oligosaccharides, or short polysaccharides. Inulin type are the most commonly studied. We have galacto-oligosaccharides as well, and we also have resistant starch. There's a small mistake in the slides, and we also can have cocoa flavonoids are not carbohydrates, so this is what I would like to discuss next. These carbohydrates are in cereals, fruits, and vegetables. So we actually, as dietitians, have to promote their use and increase their use by older adults, by all of us actually, older or younger, and make certain that people that live in long-stay residential care actually eat a diversity of these foods, so that they also have a diversity of substrates and diversity of probiotics. And apart from carbohydrates, there are also some other food constituents that may have a probiotic, where probiotic claims are made, that are cocoa flavonoids. And what about their function claims? Anyone would like, there are a lot. Anyone would like to, I have to remind that they are function claims and not health benefits. When we practice our dietitian, we cannot, for example, say that a prebiotic actually is linked with treatment of a specific disease. But we can say that it lowers the risk, and we can help the consumer make the proper deductions. Is anyone willing to make function claims? We heard a lot of them, which is just a composition of everything we have heard. Anyone interesting? So I will just put on. Sorry, yes.
Lowering cholesterol.
Yes.
Growing bifidobacterium from the caries, dental caries as well.
Yeah.
Cardiovascular diseases.
Yes.
In the also, how do you say it? Bones.
Yes.
Health.
Increase bone mineral density. But yeah, I'm sorry. Yes.
Intestinal habits.
Yes.
They promote the frequency, and they decrease the frequency of gastrointestinal symptoms.
Regulation, consistency, stool bulking are very, very important. Anyone else? You discussed about increasing calcium contact of bones, and also increasing bone mineral density. They actually lower the risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, or cardiovascular risk, metabolic syndrome. And what about how much should we consume? Well, doses of about 4 to 15 grams per day have been shown to be effective in having a real effect on gut microbiota. And we have to know that prebiotics work together with probiotics in order to benefit the host. So let's go to probiotics. Is anyone interested in definition? There's a new consensus. Now, we all heard it downstairs. Anyone interested in, yes?
There are live microorganisms that when you take them in adequate amounts, they provide health benefits.
Yeah. Okay, yes, perfect. The definitions by who. And what constituents dietary could function as probiotics? Is anyone interested in answering? It's a very practical question. Is the substrate? Yes. We can have lactobacillus includes strains. The most common probiotics include strains of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. And we have to know that health benefits are associated with a specific strain of probiotics, and it may not be extrapolated to another. And about their health benefits, there are distinct differences with prebiotic claims. Is anyone interested in, we heard them today, answering? I'm sorry, who? Is anyone?
The immune system.
Yes, very, very interesting. And yes.
Gut motility.
Yes, they're greatly associated with treating antibiotic-associated diarrhea. I think this is a very important function. All of them are important functions, actually. Improved immune function is, I think, the first. Treatment of gastrointestinal disorders, alleviating constipation, treating diarrhea, managing Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, diverticular disease, increase eradication of Helicobacter pylori when probiotics are included as part of anti-Helicobacter pylori therapy, reduce risk of colon cancer, urinary tract infection, and treatment of allergies. So, also cholesterol lowering. So, what we know is these are the nutrient function claims that we know about prebiotics and probiotics. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and hope it was very, very practical. It actually summed up what we heard today throughout the conference, and it gave, I hope it gave you a clue about what you can actually, how you can educate your patients as far as the gut microbiota concept is concerned. So,
thank you, Amalia. Now it's Lucia's turn. I think we're gonna do the discussion after the second talk. Luzia Valentini, she's actually Austrian, but she's working in Germany. She's coordinator a degree in nutrition and dietetics, and she's going to talk about dietary effects on gut microbiota to improve cardiovascular health.
Thank you. Could I have the microphone? Yeah. Does it? Okay. Okay, I can start meanwhile. I just need my presentation. Are we supposed to? Okay, thank you. Should I switch to my presentation, or will you switch to it? I would like to have my presentation. Okay. Should we do it? Sorry. I might ask you a question meanwhile. Who of you actually are a dietitian? So really, nearly everybody. The other way around, who isn't a dietitian? Because there were too many hands. There were some of them. So what are the professions you are coming from? For instance, you?
Myself?
Yeah?
From France, but I am a professor of nutrition
Okay.
and physiopathology.
Okay, nice. And you?
I'm from Barcelona.
Yeah, and but what profession?
Gastroenterology.
Just okay. So we have a mixed audience. Very nice. So, but the microphone is not working. Is it working? No. Yeah. Is it working? Okay, fine. Okay, the topic of my talk is the dietary effects on gut microbiota to improve cardiovascular effects. And I should provide you with practical recommendations. And as you know, and as you have heard in previous workshops and talks, there are no practical recommendations yet. So I want to give you an overview of this topic and maybe the vision and opportunities that are associated with it, and to bring it down to interventional studies with concrete substances. That's all I can do. I cannot offer you more. Okay, as you all know cardiovascular. Okay. It's okay, Sue? Yes. But if I stay here, yeah. Okay. Okay, then can I do yeah. So, as you all know, cardiovascular diseases are a major cost factor in the European Union, making up to about 200 billion euros the year. And they are responsible for about half of the deaths. So they are an important target for nutritional intervention. And what we are talking about today is, as we eat, and dietary compounds go along the digestive tract, and most of them are absorbed in the small intestine. But a part of it reaches the colon, and there it will be metabolized by the gut microbiota or induces gut microbiota changes. And we want to know if this that happens in the colon, does this affect the cardiovascular risk? The problem is every absorption in the small intestine will also affect cardiovascular risk. So how to distinguish? That's a challenge. In other words, our question is, can bacterial metabolites of dietary compounds or other intestinal mechanisms induced by the gut microbiota affect obesity, type 2 diabetes, low-grade inflammation, intestinal barrier integrity, blood pressure, vasodilation, serum lipids, and so on? So cardiovascular risk is a multimodal situation. And that's the second problem. I want to focus on the effects of the dietary pattern, dietary fibers, dietary phytochemicals, and the possible effects of probiotics as vitamin producers. First, dietary question. Here the main question is, can modulation of the gut microbiota by Western diets contribute to the obesogenic effects of these diets? The bioengineering work was done by the Jeff Jordan and Durnbo group and was published in 2009. And what the group essentially have done is, they had a group of mice and fed the mice a low-fat, high-fiber diet for several weeks. And they analyzed the gut microbiota composition. And you see here the composition consisted of about 50% Bacteroidetes and about 50% Firmicutes. Then they split the mice into two groups. The first group continued on the same diet, low-fat diet, high-fiber, and nothing changed, of course. And the other half was switched to a so-called Western diet, a high-fat, high-sugar diet, and the composition switched within 24 hours. So very rapidly, the Bacteroidetes group decreased and the Firmicutes group increased. And we see exactly the same pattern in obese humans. Consequently, the question is it also relevant for humans? There was another study published in 2013 from the group of Ridaura. And what they have done was they investigated monozygotic twins who were weight discordant. What means that one of the twin was obese and the other was lean. Both provided stool, and the stool was transplanted to mice. And the mice receiving the stool of the obese twin became overweight and obese themselves. So this is quite a strong argument that the gut microbiota composition of the obese twin causes something, but it's still in mice, not in humans. Consequently, I ask you the question, what do you think? You all have cards. Will dietary changes in humans affect the intestinal microbiota to the same amount as in rodents? If you think no, less than in rodents, please show up the red card. No more than in rodents, show up the yellow card. And yes, why not? Show up the not blue, lilac card. So, not everybody has cards in the background. Okay, Lala. Yeah. Okay. Yellow. Yellow. Okay. Lala. Lala. Okay, I see most of you think yes, why not? Okay. So, the correct answer, according to the current status quo of science, is no, probably less than in rodents. And one reason is that the total intra-individual variation in gut microbiota explained by change in diet in humans is about only 10%. So humans respond to dietary shifts in a largely individualistic manner and a less pronounced manner. What could be the reasons? I ask you now. What do you think? Yeah, what could be the reasons that the effects in humans are probably less pronounced than in mice? Yeah. There was one answer, we are not mice. Just think, what could be the reason? Yeah. Okay, I go on. The variation, the genetic variation is of course more than in lab mice, which are from the same strain, and also the environmental variation is more in humans. Humans do not go on vacation, they have no mice, I mean, lab mice do not go on vacation, they have no existential problems. Also, our diet varies more than the diet in mice, and also our meal times are, in most humans, are different from day to day. And another reason is that Dernbo and Jordan used very extreme diets. So they used a diet consisted of 7% fat compared to a diet with 70% fat. And that would not be possible in humans. Still, genomic studies show that there is a large inter-individual variation. Regarding the filler, you see the results from the Human Microbiome Project, results of 240 people. Each column is one individual, and the proportion of Firmicutes, for instance, varies from 10% to 90%. So we still do not know fully why this variation exists and what the consequences are. So there is still some potential, but we don't know anything more for the moment. I come to the second part. about dietary fiber. Can the gut microbiota contribute to the cardiovascular benefits of dietary fibers? And as you heard several times already, the key mechanism is degradation of non-digestible carbohydrates, not only fibers, to short-chain fatty acids. It's okay, to short-chain fatty acids, which means to acetate, propionate, and butyrate. And all three act by a multitude of molecular mechanisms, and you already heard something about it today, previously. So what are the key mechanisms leading to the cardiovascular protection? Here's a summary of it, focusing on three major mechanisms that are mainly led by the actions of butyrate. So there are other actions by propionate. So short-chain acids will affect the intestinal epithelial cells, concretely the secretion in the L cells. They enhance the secretion of glucagon-like peptide 1, which results in a higher insulin secretion. They enhance also the secretion of peptide YY, and together with glucose-like peptide 1, both of them are neuropeptides and anorexogenic substances. They induce satiation. Then butyrate also acts on the intestinal barrier. It decreases intestinal permeability and thereby probably decreases the influx of LPS, lipopolysaccharides, byproducts of bacteria, and thereby they induce an anti-inflammatory reaction. So all three together, increased insulin secretion, increased satiety, reduced inflammatory reaction, induce improved glucose tolerance, and you have a positive, beneficial cardiovascular effect. I want to provide you with a concrete example from a so-called second meal study. In this study, the effects of a meal rich in fiber was investigated on the response of the subsequent meal. That means the volunteers got an evening meal at 6 p.m., had a fasting period of 10 to 14 hours, and in the morning, all of them got a standard high glycemic breakfast, which means white bread and jam. And after the breakfast, the oral glucose tolerance test was performed. And the main question was, does an evening meal rich in cereal fibers and rich in resistant starch, can such an evening meal have effects on the next morning, the next meal, in regard to glucose response, insulin response, postprandial inflammation? This was done in a crossover study, so every volunteer was its own control. 10 healthy men were investigated, all had a normal BMI, all were young and healthy. The evening meal consisted of either 105 gram white wheat bread, corresponding to 2 grams of non-digestible carbohydrates, or 86 gram barley kernels cooked in water, corresponding to 15 gram non-digestible carbohydrates. Both meals were equivalent to 50 grams of available glucose. And here are the results. the barley meal resulted in an improved glucose response, significantly improved by a decrease of about 30%, and it also improved postprandial inflammation. So glucose is well known to induce small inflammation postprandially, and this was prevented by the barley meal in the evening. And the authors also speculated on the possible mechanism, and they also analyzed butyrate concentrations. I don't show the slide, but also butyrate was increased in the barley group. So they concluded the volunteers had increased glucose tolerance and increased insulin sensitivity, that the fiber-rich evening meal can prevent glucose-induced inflammation, and most probably the effects are due to short-chain acids produced. Okay, we come to the third part. What about plant phytochemicals? Can colonic metabolites of plant phytochemicals contribute to the severe risk reduction observed, for instance, for vegetable, fruits, and nuts? There is epidemical evidence that there is about 20% risk reduction with those foods. I pick up one big group of plant phytochemicals, that is plant polyphenols. They alone comprise about 10,000 different compounds. Each of the compounds is expected to have different effects. But important for us is that a relevant amount of these polyphenols are not absorbed in the small intestine, reach the colon, and might affect the gut microbiota. Our question is, can those metabolites possibly have health effects? And another effect of plant polyphenols can be that they have antimicrobial effects, which we will not talk about this today. We stay with the metabolites. From the polyphenols, I take a group of L-argitannins. L-argitannins are present in nuts, berries, and pomegranate. And L-argitannins are ingested by us, and they are not absorbed in the small intestine, but a part of it is hydrolyzed to ellagic acid. And both the original L-argitanin and ellagic acid reach the colon, and there they are metabolized to so-called urolithins. And the urolithins are absorbed into the systemic circulation and are held responsible for the health effects in those fruits, together with the fibers and other vitamins. So pentocollagen is the specific L-argitanin in walnut. And we stay with the walnuts, and you may know that walnuts received a health claim about 2 years ago. A health claim that they are able to increase the elasticity of arterial walls. And in the next slide, I want to show you a part of a study that contributed to receiving this health claim. And in this study, 12 volunteers with untreated hypercholesterolemia were investigated, again in a crossover study, and they received for 2 weeks, before the investigation started, a Mediterranean diet, a standardized one, just to normalize the gut flora. Then, on the first study day, they received a lunch, a high-fat lunch, substituted with 40 grams of walnuts. And after the meal, at baseline, before the meal, and 4 hours after the meal, the elasticity of the arterial walls was investigated with flow-mediated dilation. It's just an ultrasound technique to do it. Okay, that's what was the first part. Then they had again the standardized Mediterranean diet for another 2 weeks, and they received a second meal. The same meal, this time supplemented with 25 grams olive oil. Both meals had a total of 63% fat. Okay, now the result. And again, the higher the elasticity, the better. The lower, the worse. And we know that high-fat meals induce a reduction per se. And you see this reduction with olive oil, this normal reduction, but with walnuts, it was an increase. And there are 3 studies done that show in about the same results, also in long-term studies. And that's the reason why it received this health claim. And the effects are contributed to elagidanins. We are not sure yet, but we think it's for the chemicals. So, the last part is, can vitamin produce, can probiotics produce vitamins, and is this relevant for cardiovascular protection? The first question is easy to answer. It is known for a long time that some bacteria, really can produce vitamins of the vitamin B group, mainly also vitamin K. 2 groups so far are identified that to produce vitamins, and that is the group of bifidobacteria consisting of 39 species, and the group of lactic acid bacteria consisting of about 100 species. And these bacteria can either be commensal or foodborne. So the next question for you. What do you think? If a bacterium produces, for instance, folate, how many enzymes are necessary for the bacteriums to be expressed in the bacterium itself, so that it is able to produce, for instance, folate? Is it 3 enzymes? Is it 9 enzymes? Is it 18 enzymes? Yeah. There's no option for I don't know. So, okay, just show your cards. Okay. There is yellow and lilac in about the same amount. Yes, it's really 18 enzymes which must be expressed by the bacterium. And that's a limitation. So you see here the synthesis pathway for folate necessary in a bacterium. It's very complex, and folate is a very simple molecule. Vitamin B is much more complicated. So, and we will see in the next slide how many enzymes 8 different bifidobacteria strains really express. So here are the enzymes necessary for the production. The yellow areas means okay, they express it. The black area mean no, they don't express it. And there is, for the first 8 steps, this is apparently no problem, but many of them cannot produce the full molecule of folate. Okay, that's how far we are. We made one study with actually a different endpoint objective, and I will show you a secondary, tertiary result in this study which is relevant for our immediate question. So we investigated healthy older people aged 65 to 85 who either got an electronic diet information or the same electronic diet information plus a probiotic for 2 months. And our primary endpoint, we actually wanted to know, does these diets plus and minus the probiotic change low-grade inflammation? And we did not really see a major effect on our primary endpoint. But by chance, we also evaluated folate and vitamin B2 in these patients. And we saw that the probiotic group had increased folate and had increased vitamin B in the end, after 2 months. And this corresponded to a decrease, a significant decrease in homocysteine. So that is a clear cardiovascular protective effect. And our explanation is that vitamin production by the probiotic bacteria contributed or caused this effect. So to summarize, there are dietary effects on gut microbiota to improve cardiovascular risk, whereby the effects of the dietary patterns still are not very clear. So there may be obesogenic effects, but we don't know. Dietary fibers, on the other hand, show a clear potential for cardiovascular risk reduction, and the phytochemicals in vegetables, fruits, or nuts have a high potential, but also high diversity, and there is really much research needed. Yeah, and there are seemingly effects of probiotics on vitamin production, and that might be interesting for food manufacturers also to focus on this. Overall, the findings so far support the general recommendations for healthy eating. They provide some mechanistic explanation for it. But, as I said before, a large amount of human research is still necessary. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Luzia. Now it's time for discussion. So, Amalia, please. Yes. Would you mind to join Luzia for discussion? We're waiting for the microphone.
Say that there's enough known about the microbiota to recommend consumption of fermented foods containing live microbes as part of a healthy diet?